We're asking that everybody stay muted during the presentation unless you're asking a question, please.
Eager and Brother Pieces. Come on in. Okay. Let me unmute. Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you all so much for joining us this evening as we begin this study of this tremendous book. You can see it displayed here in front of me. Dr. Joy Degruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. I've read it a couple of times and going back and looking through the workbook and getting some new information and getting a new edition of it. It's enlightening all over again. Let me tell you a little history about why we're here and why we're doing it, and while I'm doing it with my friend Dr. Kevin McPherson, the Care for Change, is that I wanted, as pastor of East 6th Street Christian Church, for us to study this book and begin to deal with trauma, to deal with historical trauma. And I thought that is the root of so many things that have manifested themselves in the last several years, and that is really the explanation of as to why we do certain things the way that we do. Don't mean any harm. It's just meant that that's always the way that we have done them in our past. And the reality is that our ancestors, who had to endure some hellish and horrific conditions, they had to come up with coping mechanisms, something just to make it through the day. And the situation now, we are 150 years, 200 years later, and some of us are still doing the same kind of things that our ancestors did just to make it. And we're in a different time and space. And though we have several challenges, there are certain things that I think that, and we think that you ought to be able to do better than our ancestors did, to a certain extent. But we thank them. We wouldn't be here if it had not been for them, and coming up with ways to make it and to sustain themselves under that situation. So, by trying to get this thing set up with the church, it started growing first of all because there were people that were not a part of the church that wanted to be a part of the church. And then I had a conversation with my friend, Dr. Kevin McPherson, who's the founder of Care for Change, an agency that's been present here in Northeast Oklahoma City for 25 years, that has done the work here in terms of counseling and working with people one-on-one who have addictions, who have trauma, and some historical trauma, and just trying to bring some salvation and some clarity to them in that way. And we thought, what a wonderful thing it would be for our community, not just our congregation at East 6th Street, but for our community to talk about trauma and historical trauma in our community. Because the reality is that we need to be able to branch out and try to reach more than just our particular congregation. And so we want people to tune in, to participate. We have the Zoom set up. We have Facebook Live and YouTube Live set up. And we want you to share this with people and invite others to join us. I'm going to give you an email address in just a little bit as to how you can join the Zoom, because we're going to do this for 4 weeks. This is the first week. So starting next week and the weeks after, we'll be doing some things where we take a lot of questions. And so really and truly, the only kind of questions we can take are from Zoom, because we can hear them and we can see you when you're doing it. So I'm going to give you an email address that I want you to send us an email and say, look, I'd like to participate in the Zoom. Sister Carmen and my wife will send you a link, and then you can hook up with that link and be here when we begin at 7 p.m. next time. So before we go any further, I do want to thank our host this evening, the Nappy Roots Bookstore. here on Liberation Corner here, Northeast 36 in Spring Lake, here in Oklahoma City. This is just a marvelous place, a wonderful place. And one of the reasons I wanted to be over here to start this was just because of the spirit that is present in this place. And Sister Camille has opened the doors graciously to many, many, many people in this community and beyond this community. And we thank her for this and for this opportunity to do this again this evening. So I just want to shout her out. And anybody that knows me know that I have a book addiction. And so this is like this is like sending the fat man into an ice cream shop. It is what it is. And so I'm enjoying it. So with all that said, I do want to introduce you to my partner in this endeavor, Dr. McPherson. I'm allow him, please. I want him to introduce himself, and then we'll get into some of the parameters of this discussion.
Hey, well, first of all, Brother Jackson, thank you. Sister Jackson, you all, thank you. Let me say that. And to Nappy Roots, to Sisters Camille, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm honored. I'm actually humbled, Brother Jackson, to be able to do this with you. When I saw that your church was going to be studying post-traumatic slave syndrome, and this was one of the books that, in my younger years, I'm at the University of Oklahoma in my second round. I had a couple rounds at OU. I was able to discover this book, and it changed my life. And I believe that, I'll say this, I consider myself an educator who's licensed to practice therapy. So as an educator who's licensed to practice therapy, I believe that utilizing education to deal with our unresolved trauma is the only way we're going to see some kind of positive change in our society. So this book, from a Care for Change perspective, if we can bring about knowledge and education by getting people to read the book, by getting people to have an understanding of historical trauma, this book is just one of the books that we will be talking about at Care for Change. But we thought it was a great opportunity to join with East 6th Street and to join with you, brother. Just to say that I have a great deal of respect for your knowledge, for your consciousness, for your ability to teach. And so, again, I consider it an honor to be able to do this with you for 4 weeks and to kind of share the platform of what Care for Change is trying to do in our outreach strategy to address historical trauma.
Amen. Amen. Before I go on, I do again want to thank my wife, Sister Carmen, and I would certainly like to thank Sister Dawson for all of their technical help and electronics help tonight. I'm electronically ignorant, I must admit. And so I thank you all for all your help in doing this. Now, the whole idea about trauma, I said in the sermon a couple of months ago that trauma travels. And what I meant by that, it travels from generation to generation. We don't always call it trauma because we can't identify what it is. We don't know. A lot of people that are in the middle of trauma, they don't know why they do what they do. They don't know how to describe it. In some areas of the church, they call it generational curses. It's because they're dealing with trauma, and it's the same type of trauma that they dealt with in the generation before, in the generation before, and in the generation before. It's just like one thing happens after other, and it's almost like it's an inevitability of that happening.
Yes, sir.
But you don't have to be
No, sir.
what your foreparents were. You don't have to experience some of the things that they did.
I'm not an email.
Because now you are new.
I'm so sorry.
And we need you to be new. We need you to be able to be whole. And wholeness is a major thing. And I know we'll hear that when Dr. McPherson brings something to us and we start talking about the healing part, which is the goal of this whole thing. It's not just to diagnose the problem, but it's to talk about it, to diagnose it, and then to work toward the healing, to try to fix some of it. The one thing about trauma is that trauma can stop with you. We need it to stop with you. Our community our families, our schools, all of our institutions. We need trauma to stop. Don't pass that on to the next generation, and you get healed from what happened to you.
Mhm.
Those are things that we need. And for people that are in the middle of raising children right now, we say if you ever flown on a plane, you're gonna hear the people when they start explaining to you what to do in the case of emergency. They're gonna tell you if you're traveling with small children or the elderly to put the mask on yourself first. And what we have are too many people that are trying to put the mask on everybody else, and they have not taken the time to put the mask on themselves. So we have to begin to deal with that. In addition to the book, there is also a workbook that's available. I have mine, and Dr. McPherson has his right now. Same title, Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and it has additional information in there to stimulate conversation. There was one thing in here that I underlined when I was looking at that the other day, Dr. McPherson. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this because when I was teaching at Marcus Garvey, the class that I was teaching, young men, we watched the film about Marcus Garvey, and the lady was talking about her father and her father who had lived in the 20s, and her father had a menial job. He had no education. He'd come from the South. He was working a menial job. But she talked about the pride when he put that uniform on. When he put that uniform on and they were able to march in those parades, it not only changed his demeanor, it really gave him something to hold on to. And so she has a line on page 6 in the workbook that says, how essential is self-esteem and respect to human beings. Excuse me. Many social scientists and clinicians suggest that all human beings have an essential need for respect. An essential need for respect. And before that, she says, slavery violated the primary value system of familial tribal relationships. As a result of slavery, individuals were remanded to group inferiority. Excuse me. Dr. McPherson, what can you say about group inferiority and trying to overcome that?
Well, and what I would say, and looking at the book and looking at what she talks about, truth is told that the history, and no one can deny this, that our history in these United States was one that was based on the inferiority of the actors.
Yeah.
That was the only way you can enslave someone, was to make them inferior, because you can't enslave your equal.
Yeah.
And so the system was designed, and I say that again, the system was designed to perpetuate group inferiority. And so what she's talking about in this book is that, one of the ways that you have to address this idea of group inferiority is that you have to look at self-esteem. Mm-hmm. You have to look at, self-awareness. You have to look at self-knowledge. And if you look at the system, you bring up the idea of Marcus Garvey. At Marcus Garvey, you were teaching young men self-awareness, self-knowledge, and thereby you was addressing their historical trauma. Because the better I feel about myself, the better I feel about my community, the better I feel about my people, the more apt I am to seek to be excellent and to seek to do well, because I feel good about who I am.
And I, every now and then I get messages, and it's ironic that I got one this morning from a young man, Isaiah Dean, as a matter of fact. I shared on Facebook a photo of the class from like 2008. And we're in the gym at Marcus Garvey, me and Mr. Tennyson and the young man. And he remarked that those sayings and poems that you made me remember saved me during a lot of times. And I've heard that from Brother Muhammad. I've heard that from a couple of them on there. And I'm just thrilled about that. Because Lord knows, you know, we were trying to do the best that we could with those young men and wanted to impart into them uh, everything that we possibly could and more than what was imparted into me. The kind of teachers that I would love to have had, that is what I tried to do for them. And be there for them. And that's a big thing now. And education is a key. And again, I applaud you. I know you get applauded for this all the time, but to put your money where your mouth is, and to have that kind of effect, that kind of vision, that was such a blessing to this city and blessing to this community is certain to be commended always. There are several people that were that have their tentacles and have their beginnings in Marcus Garvey, and that's a major thing.
I was told that I think maybe the brand new principal of Douglas High School is a Marcus Garvey teacher, Mr. Jones.
Wow.
As of this week is what I'm told. So I hope that's true. I'm not spreading rumors. But let me say this. Do you know that Marcus Garvey came out of my trauma?
Did it?
Marcus Garvey actually came out of my trauma in that as I still deal with my personal trauma, as I still try to deal with getting a better knowledge of self. I was at the University of Oklahoma. I was a professor down there. And, you know, I love my institution more than anything in the world. But it's been proven since then that we have some issues at our institution, sister, because we went there together. And so I love OU. I'll fight you about the Sooners. Let me say that. But at the time, I was going through a situation to where I felt like my anxiety level was such that I could not deal with the University of Oklahoma anymore. So I walked away. I quit. Wasn't smart at all. I said, you know what? I don't need it. And I didn't need it, but I should have stayed there and I should have handled it differently. But at the time, I was young. And like I said, my anxiety level was very high. I was dealing with some traumatic things, and I didn't feel like that institution could provide me with what I needed at the time. Now, in hindsight, it was a quick decision. It was one that I probably shouldn't have made. But in doing that, I said this, why don't I use this PhD to go do something such as be an activist intellectual and try to build something. If I have a PhD in education, but you cannot affect the lives of children like the young man that texted you this morning, and what good is a PhD in education if you can't use it to help people?
Amen.
You know, and so that's what the idea came. And Care for Change was 10 years old at the time. By the way, we're 28 years old.
28.
I'm just turned 28 years in May. And so Care for Change was 10 years old. And what had happened at the time was that we had always worked with young people, and particularly African-American males. And what we noticed was that because of changes in the system, we were no longer getting African-American males because we went from a criminal justice focus to a therapeutic focus. And at the time, our young kids weren't getting therapy. They were being sent to jail.
That's right.
And so the idea is that we will open a school because a school is the one place that everybody has to go.
Yeah.
And so that's where the idea came from. But it was really because I was looking for a way to do, as if you look at what Dr. Degruy talked about in this book. One of the things she says is that one of the questions that you ask in this book is, how are the children?
Yeah.
And so your children are an indication of how you are as a community. So if your children's school situation are bad, or crime situation, you got a school to prison pipeline, then you have
which we do.
Well, and so how do we utilize dealing with our unresolved trauma? How do we use strategies and techniques? How do we teach our community people strategies and techniques for dealing with the realities of our historical trauma? And here's what I'd say. You couldn't have grown up in the United States without some historical trauma.
No, impossible.
I don't care if you're Native American,
Yeah.
if you're one of our Hispanic brothers and sisters, if you're a Caucasian, if you're Black, the truth of this country causes trauma. And that's what she does a great job of in this book, is talking about how this trauma, how this system was created to produce exactly what you see going on today.
No, and we're talking about trauma and a great deal of it from the African American community standpoint, but we're talking about trauma in general. And as you just said, it's across the board. And one of the ways I thought that we were dealing with trauma at Marcus Garvey one of the things I thought we were dealing with in Marcus Garvey was that truth, I thought, was a serum for Trump. And now truth has become political football. And particularly with, this whole deal, and here in Oklahoma is the House Bill 1775, in which, you can actually lose your teaching license for teaching the truth. Some things, they just happen, and you can't explain it without explaining it in its totality and how it happened. Somebody did what happened. It didn't just happen at all. Somebody did it. And I know that there are canned ways to teach this stuff, and so many children get miseducated and just get it glossed over. And I'm gonna tell you where you find that out. You find it later on when those people are in business or in politics and they don't know a doggone thing. They have such a messed up view of history and reality. And the reality of history is so different, they think you're lying to them when you actually tell them the truth. I mean, that's how bad that is. So, and when you look at what happened in this nation, and on the 28th, we're having a march and a rally, and we're going to meet on the north side of the legislature. There, right here on 23rd and Lincoln, and we have people that be speaking on rights from different angles. I'm going to be doing something at that march, and my thing is going to be education. I'm actually going to give a small lesson, a 5 to 10 minute lesson that would actually have been banned under 1775. All I'm going to do is tell the truth and tell the story, and to try to explain that this is what they don't want me to teach in the classroom. It's reality that Oklahoma spent a lot of time begging and politicking and lobbying to become a state. There were a whole lot of things to consider. One thing to consider was the politics of it. Oklahoma did add 2 new Democratic senators, and so Theodore Roosevelt didn't want that drama. He didn't want that imbalance coming in. He also didn't want them to pass Jim Crow like they had all over the South. And Oklahoma swore they wouldn't do
it. And yet, Senate Bill number 1.
Senate Bill number 1. Oklahoma is barely a state. Senate Bill number 1 was a Jim Crow bill.
If I may, because I want to kind of put my context into this in terms of, again, an educator who is licensed to provide therapy, but an educator first. And so many people don't know this, but my first degree from the University of Oklahoma is in political science. Most people don't know that I was studying political science. I wanted to go to law school. I was going to be a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. And so I have a bachelor's degree in public administration, political science from the University of Oklahoma. I also have a master's degree in public administration from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at the University of Oklahoma. And I'm not saying these things to talk about my education, because everybody knows how I feel about that. Yeah. Go study. I'm saying these things because I studied politics. I'm going to say it again. I'm saying these things. I'm speaking as a person who has studied politics, but I'm an educator who's licensed to practice therapy. And so humbly, Pastor Jackson, what I'll say is that for this, in terms of dealing with historical trauma, that cognitive dissonance that we suffer is part of what causes the historical trauma. Let me give you an example. I grew up in a town where you had Black people, white people, Hispanic people, Asian people, and what we had to do was figure out how to get along. We had to figure out how to be on the same wrestling team, how to be on the same football team, how to exist in this town. Did racism exist? Yes. Do I have a lot of trauma? A lot of trauma from my hometown? Yes. Do I love that place? And do I believe that it taught me, get this, that you must deal with the reality of your historical trauma? One of the reasons that I've been able to be quote unquote successful, 2 master's degrees, a PhD, is that because I learned to understand that I got issues.
Yeah.
That I got thinking issues, and that it's a day-to-day struggle for me if I want to be excellent in what I do. And so I simply say that to say that when it comes to the House Bill, which one is it, 1775?
1775.
Let me say this about House Bill 1775. House Bill 1775 is a political construct. I told you I studied political science at the University of Oklahoma. And so what I mean by that is that I don't even address House Bill 1775 because I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
Now, I respect what you do as a community advocate and your role and what many people do. And that's part of what we have to do is respect what other people are doing. But I think that that bill is a political construct. I think it's just something that doesn't make any sense. It's a political bill.
Yeah.
The people who wanted that bill passed, no, they stand by that. I talk to them on a regular basis. See, so what I'm saying to our community and what I'm saying to those people who tune on here is that, well, why would we be surprised that people want to ignore the truth?
And we shouldn't be.
It hurts.
They always have.
And it hurts.
They always have.
It hurts. You see some of what you probably going to teach.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've been caught up with a quote from Dr. King, and I think this comes out of the letter from Birmingham jail about us being caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. That we're tied together in a single garment of destiny. We all are accountable to one another. We all are responsible for one another. We all are connected, whether we want it to be that way or not. And Coretta King expanded the definition of violence for me when she said that hunger is violence and miseducation is violence. And all these other things that she listed is violence, and violence causes trauma.
Yes.
And for somebody to be miseducated, I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to over the years, grown people, that when they hear something that, you know, has been in the air and been in the public domain for 100 years, and then it's, oh man, I never knew that. I never knew it. And it's a shock to them, and it pisses them off, quite frankly, because then they start thinking about, well, what else was I not taught?
And why?
And why? And people will withhold parts of history from you for a specific reason. And Dr. Joy does on page 7 of this workbook, the loss of self-esteem is experienced subjectively as the death of self. People will sacrifice anything to prevent the death and disintegration of their individual or group identity. If you think that people are trying to replace you, if you saw the census stuff that said that at 2050, you know, we will no longer be a majority in this nation. You do what you can, and you know, I mean, traveling through Charlottesville, holding the torches and shouting, "You will not replace us." I mean, the realities are coming home to roost now, and that has spawned Donald Trump, and it spawned so much of else that we've seen from January 6th on forward to 1775.
What psychologically, what would you have me do if you're going to be changing my system? I want to take politics out of it. We're dealing with psychology. We're dealing with trauma now. And the trauma wasn't a Black trauma. It was an American trauma.
Yeah, it was.
That's why I brought up my hometown and where I live in terms of we had to learn, get this, we had to learn how to get along and how how to live together. And so this trauma, let me give you an example, maybe because I can sometimes start thinking a lot. I'm going to try to be very, very, very practical in these 4 weeks and try to make what we're talking about very relevant to the people in the community that I'm currently dealing with. So it's what, August? So June, July. What was it in May? Was it the 100-year anniversary of what happened in Tulsa?
Yes.
Now, I heard and you saw thousands of people in the state of Oklahoma saying, I never knew that.
Yeah.
I was never taught that. So this is not some big thing. I'm trying to push this very small, very local, very Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Because the issues of trauma in Oklahoma are unique compared to anywhere else in the world for African people. Right here in Oklahoma,
Right.
You know what occurred in Tulsa. And so here's what I would say, man. I was so pleased and I was so proud of Dr. DeMario Solomon Simmons. I was proud of Dr. Tiffany Crutcher. I was happy about State Senator Kevin Matthews in terms of the attention that I saw people getting on Tulsa and the education that was being provided about what happened. And then the President of the United States came and said this was the worst racial massacre in the history of the United States.
He called it what it was.
My question as a therapist, as a person who wants to say, okay, it happened. Now, how can we address the manifestations of that event, of that trauma, which is still going on in North Tulsa and Northeast Oklahoma City, throughout the state of Oklahoma? And so if it was the worst racial massacre, what's being done about it? What are we? In fact, you know me, I'm self-determination. What can be done by the people who were victims of this trauma to change the current situation for their children? What strategies and techniques can be utilized to cut back on the school to prison pipeline? You were doing it. You were actively teaching young boys. You were building their self-esteem. You were looping with them. That was a whole new education concept. Yeah. You were looping with these boys. And so they're still to this day reaching out to you saying thank you. See, so that's a strategy for addressing historical trauma. Now, here's the question. Why don't we have more classes like that? Why don't we have more teachers like you? How do we create a system that builds self? Here's the thing. Why would I want to go to a school that tells me that I began my history as a slave in 1619? Yeah. What would make me feel good about that if I go to a school that says that all we ever were was slaves? It doesn't go back further than 1619.
Or that our foreparents that were brought here in slavery were immigrants. Mm-hmm. And that was not the case at all.
You see. And so again, getting back to that political construct, because that's kind of what you brought about. No, it's what we need to do is teach the children, or as Dr. Degruy talked about in her book, you have to tell a new historical narrative. What's the story? Were Black people really in Africa sitting around doing nothing, and then European people came and said, no, that's not the truth.
No, it's not the truth. But, you know, something else that we have to do, Doc, and you were talking about that after the apology, we have to stop accepting cheap victories. And this is what people get upset with me for, because and you know, they talk about, well, he came and he apologized. You know, I mean, even if it's the governor or the mayor or the president or anybody else or the Congress, they apologize. Okay, I'm happy that they did. Now what? What becomes of that? And Dr. Degruy outlines in her book about the 2008 apology from the United States Senate. It was a non-binding resolution, which means that nothing happened. And I think about how I had an uncle that would make anybody fighting hold hands. Oh, I hated that. And you had to hold hands with the person you were just throwing fists at. I hated that kind of stuff. But it precipitated those kind of apologies. You need to say you sorry. I'm sorry. You're not sorry. I mean, there was nothing genuine about what you just said. Uh, and so, and certainly when nothing came out of that. And so we're looking for tangible results. And then when we begin to talk about tangible results, it makes some people say, well, hey, this dude apologized and things are this, things are that. We are not, no one is if we are church people, and everybody may not be, everybody, and I'm not going to take it for granted that everybody is, but as religious people, as Christians, as Jews, as Muslims, we have to deal with reconciliation. And reconciliation is more than saying, I'm sorry. Reconciliation is dealing with the damage done and making amends for the damage done and making a genuine commitment to never do that again. Because right before Dr. King spoke of that mutual network, that inescapable network of mutuality, Dr. King said that we must either learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools.
So if the United States of America ship sinks, we all drown.
Everybody drown. Everybody.
Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, everybody. So the idea is that we don't want the ship to sink. I personally do not want the ship to sink.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. I am a conscious person who know very well what happened in history. Know very, very well what happened in history. But the concern is that how do we engage what happened in the history to make today and tomorrow better? That was one of the reasons, Pastor Jackson, that I got excited about the church and doing this, not just with you. We did a previous few presentations with Pastor Byron Coleman from the Street Baptist Church, and it was about trauma in the Black church. The idea is that the church has always been the central institution in the African American community. Mm-hmm. And it is expanded now from the church to spiritual institutions, or I'll even say spirituality. So those of us who are spiritual, I wouldn't even say Christians, those of us who are believers, that might be a better word.
Yeah.
Those of us who are believers know the work that we're supposed to be doing in terms of helping the least of these. And so one of the things you just said was, before we can help the least of these, we must first help ourselves. We must put our oxygen mask on first. And so I'm talking to church folks now. We're talking to folks in the community. And so we say that before you get too involved in this book, do you have a therapist? Do you have a counselor? Does your children need some help? Are they acting up in school? Are they having issues sleeping at night? Family, community, this COVID-19 pandemic and people going to school online is having a devastating effect on all children. Now, disproportionately on certain groups of children because of technology, etc. But if we were already traumatized before COVID, then we are triple, double, quadruple traumatized now. And so the question becomes, how do we help the children? Once again, how are the children?
Yeah.
What can we do to get them to, better yet, I'll give you one. What can we do to begin to better address the suicide rates that's going up in the African American community?
And see, I don't even know that people are aware of that. And I don't even know that people are aware of the fact that particularly many African Americans are now doing the type of drugs that they used to say, well, we don't do that. We do this, we do that. But we don't do that. Well, yes, we do. And we do a lot of it, a great deal of it. And so these are things, and we're used to trying to deal with secrets and trying to heal ourselves. And there's some things, quite honest, you can't fix yourselves. It's things about my car, you know, and I'm not mechanically inclined, but there's stuff about my car that I can't even do. I mean, it's just the way it is. They make cars now; they have to put them on machine. You know, most folks don't have that sitting in their garage.
Mhm.
And so, you know, you can't fix yourself. You need to go to somebody who can. And it's absolutely no shame. And I think I said in a sermon about 2 weeks ago, it's all right to pray, but it's all right to have a therapist too.
In fact, the pastor needs a therapist.
Absolutely.
And let me be honest, pastors are calling me saying, hey, I am feeling this way. I am feeling this way. And Dr. McPherson, do you have any suggestions? Pastors are calling, which is beautiful, because the day that the leaders start to accept help is the day that the leaders can help the people. And so that's one of the things that we really want to push is that. Let me give you kind of a quick history. About 2 years ago, Let's Get Right. Brother Epe Udo has an organization called Let's Get Right, and he brought Dr. Joy Degruy to Oklahoma City about 2 years ago. I was able to attend. I loved it. I have, of course, knew about the book from many, many years ago and read the book and been in some of the same places where Dr. Degruy was speaking and those types of things. But Brother Epe gave me a scholarship and gave me a scholarship to go take her class online. I'm going to strongly suggest those of you all who are listening, Dr. Degruy has a class online that you can actually go take. And it was one of the best experiences I had. In fact, I loved it so much that after Brother Epe gave me a scholarship, I went ahead and paid for the next class, the relational approach. And so this information that Dr. Degruy has, all you have to do is go to a website. But I said this to Brother Epe. I said, Brother Epe, I want to take the class because I want something to come out of her visit.
Yeah.
And so what you see going on today is after I took the 2 classes, and let me say this, I probably would have considered myself auditing those classes, considering how busy I am. In fact, I always wondered if she was like, man, where is he at? Because again, I run Care for Change. I'm a single parent. I got a lot going on. And so I would say I audited both classes, but I learned a great deal.
Yeah.
And I would strongly recommend that. But one of the things that we talked about was implementing models for change. How do you implement models for change in terms of people dealing with trauma? What can you do to change the situation? How can we begin to help people deal with their unresolved trauma? And so for you all and for the church, it's a study group, which is a beautiful thing. For Care for Change, though, we've got phases. Phase 1, we were looking to coordinate a community awareness campaign, which is what this is. Most people don't know what historical trauma is.
Yeah.
Most people have never heard of Dr. Naeem Akbar. They've never heard of Resmaa Menakem. They've never read any Isabel Wilkerson. They've never read any haven't read this one for that matter.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that we have to go back. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah says this. He says, go to the people, live among them, start with what they know and build from there.
Yeah.
And so that's what I saw you doing and your church doing was now we can take this book that each 6th Street is doing and we can try to get more people to read the book, more people to understand what historical trauma is, and thereby hopefully have more people who are willing to work to address historical trauma by community engagement. One of the things that we believe at Care for Change is that creative expression. That's rhythmic people. Our children have always been attracted to creative expression. So creative expression has to be one of the ways that we address historical trauma, be it through our music. You did it with the poetry.
Yeah.
See, to this day, they still remember those poems. That was creative expression. And so Care for Change is from a therapeutic standpoint, wants to put together more programming. We want to coordinate more stuff with creative expression. We believe that, particularly with marijuana becoming legal in Oklahoma, that we have to create an emphasis on adolescent substance abuse.
Okay.
Substance abuse with the kids in terms of teaching our children, these are the effects of these drugs. And then you're talking about breaking historical trauma. Just because you have addiction in your family, you can be the one that can break the cycle. That's right. How do I do that?
That's right.
Pastor Jackson, how do I break the cycle? How How do I become different than the other people in my family? And that's what we're trying to do, but it starts with education.
Yes, it does. And this is always the frustrating part when people are looking for answers. They're looking to come in and say, okay, tell me what to do, exactly what to do, and I'll make sure I do everything that you say. Well, it's not that kind of situation. Uh, these are steps to wholeness that we take together and we learn from each other together. So particularly when we begin to dialogue with one another, the learning will not be a one-sided affair. We'll be learning and taking suggestions and maneuvering stuff and just getting it ready because this is a journey. This is a journey. There are no quick fixes. I can't think of my man Amilcar Cabral. Tell no lies and take no quick victories.
Tell no lies and take no quick victories.
This is not a quick victory. Look, you mentioned it. We've been here since 1619 in this country. And we are one of the most unique groups of Africans that you will find anywhere else. Everybody has not paid the money to try to find out their ethnic roots in Africa, where they come from. And then when you get it, then you get disappointed because you can't really pinpoint every single thing. And then you find out you got some stuff that you had no idea you had. How did this get in here? And you know, it's a fact of who we are as Americans. And you mentioned the uniqueness of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is absolutely unique. Anybody that's been here 3 generations, there ain't nowhere in the world you don't have Native American in your blood. At some point, as many freedmen as we have, as many card-carrying tribal members of every single tribe, the 5 civilized tribes to Kiowa, to Cheyenne, Arapaho, and I mean, it all over. And this is about who we are. And as you said earlier, trauma has been a part of humanity from the beginning. And so our search for trauma is our search for an end to trauma, a way to confront and defeat the trauma that has been negative in our lives. It just begins with this discussion.
And
with this discussion.
Just begins. And so this won't be, I'm excited again. One of the things I like about Pastor Coleman, and one of the things I like about you, and one of the reasons I attended you all's churches is that I felt like you all were scholars. I respected the scholarship. I respected the work that you and Pastor Coleman put in. But here's what people have to understand, and here's what I believe that East 6th Street understands, and here's what I believe the people affiliated with 5th Street understand is that you gotta learn. You gotta study. You have to read.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing in this is not for everybody, because everyone doesn't want to read. Everyone doesn't want to study. Some people don't want to put in the difficult work that it takes to understand the present situation. It's not for everybody. That's why I got excited when I saw y'all. I said, man, can you imagine the children if Reverend Jackson and his church can help the children understand? Get this. Not that there was a massacre in Tulsa. I want to talk about why there was a massacre in Tulsa. See, that's where the motivation, that's where the self-esteem comes into play. Teach the children that they were doing so great. They were doing such amazing things that some jealous people tried to take what they had and they did it. But let's not focus on the massacre. That was my thing when President Biden was here, and I was quiet. And I watched it and I said, just wait, because I want to see what happens when all of this is over. Who's going to teach the children that Greenwood was what Atlanta is today? Everybody love go to Atlanta, and you like Atlanta. That was Tulsa. That was people tell me all the time when I went to school in New York. I didn't know there was any black people in Oklahoma. I said, you are so ignorant. You have no idea the black history in the state of Oklahoma and the number of black towns we have. And get this. And here's the part where I think that you'll get people, Pastor Jackson, is that, wait a minute. If slavery had just ended, how in 20 years did they build boldly?
Yeah.
If these people were savages, if these people were not allowed to read and write, How could they build Bowley? How could they build Langston? How could they fight for Oklahoma to become a black state? And so herein lies the cognitive dissonance, the craziness. On the one hand, I got to say these people were savages. On the other hand, I got to admit about Timbuktu and Mali.
Yeah.
You see? So that's that craziness. And so what happens is that trauma plays out in all the communities in ways. And so here's the thing. If you ever watch Eyes on the Prize, you should ask yourself this question. And I might have gotten this from Dr. Degruy's class, or I may have gotten it because a lot of her stuff is online. All you got to do is Google it. You can see it.
Yeah.
But I think it was in Chicago, and they were kind of immigrating Cicero, Illinois, or something like that.
Yeah.
But the question she asked was, where did all that hate go? Where did all that hate go that you saw in the 1960s? It just disappeared? No, that's a lie. It is still existing to this day, and that is why America is dealing with some of the issues we have. And so it is better for everyone. It is better for white people, it's better for black people, it's better for Hispanic people, it's better for Asian people. It is better for everyone if we stop lying and not wanting to deal with our historical trauma. And I know that there are political things going on about that. What I'm going to say, at least for the 4 weeks I'm here, at least for the 4 weeks I'm here, please let's not get caught up in those politics.
Yeah. It's one thing that we said a little while ago that I really think that we need to continue to address, and that is the fact that when I mentioned that quote that she had, that people would sacrifice anything to prevent the death and disintegration of the individual or the group identity. We know we have some brothers and sisters, and I'm calling that loosely, that are fighting being brothers and sisters truly. Mm-hmm. We know we have some. And I rail against those who I think are perverting the gospel by turning Jesus into a capitalist, authoritarian figure, instead of being, who Jesus was, a Palestinian rabbi that didn't have a place to lay his head.
Amen.
And so when we have people doing this, I worry. The worry is this: we know that we are supposed to live as sisters and brothers. We know what we have to do to prevent this ship from sinking. None of us want it to sink, but we have some people that are bound and determined, like suicide bombers, that if I can't have my way, we're gonna take this whole thing down. If I can't not continue to be and not only in charge, but to just exert my will on you and make you do what I want you to do, make you believe what I want you to believe. And when we have people that will do that, that's the challenge, because then we all have to work on forgiveness from that standpoint, because we can't stand those folks.
Well, and let me say this. You're a pastor, and I'm a believer, so I'm going to respect and follow you on that one. No, really, in terms of, I know my role. I'm a teacher. I'm an educator who's licensed to provide therapy. And so, Pastor Jackson, I believe from a spiritual perspective, I agree with you 100%. But one of the things that I've had to learn how to do as a part of dealing with my trauma is dealing with my cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Mine. On the one hand, I know what's right. On the one hand, I know as a Christian person, because I am what I should be doing, but it's hard sometimes dealing with folks. And so what I would say is this, though. So you know what helped me when I was down at OU dealing with some of the racism that I dealt with down at OU? I said, well, Kevin, what would you expect from a racist system? You the one crazy. I counsel myself, I'm the one crazy. Why are you acting as if a system that you studied, that you know was going to all of a sudden give you, what Frederick Douglass said? They ain't going to just give it to you. No. And so what I'm saying is that what you just described in terms of people wanting to keep themselves is a normal response to historical trauma.
Yeah.
Again, I don't agree with it, but I understand why a person who built a system that was not fair to anybody but themselves, why would all of us say, you know what? I'm going to share with everybody.
Yeah.
In fact, it's more likely from a historical truth that they would do just the opposite.
Yeah. So now we're going to change the narrative. That never happened.
Well, we have to.
That never happened.
Y'all done started reading and learning, and now y'all trying to change the laws.
So this is the challenge that we have as we move forward, and as you explain what happened in Oklahoma, throughout all Oklahoma, particularly in North Tulsa and Bowley and Langston and so many other things during that time, we have many more resources than those such and brothers had. And it's about having the drive that they had. It's about having the purpose that they had. And those people knew what they were coming out of. The trauma was fresh on them. It was very fresh. But look, here's the deal. Some of this trauma is very fresh on us.
Hey.
But I think that we have more self-inflicted trauma.
Well, it's become more acceptable. A socialization system that has socialized us through the very thing. One time, I think it was Dr. Henderson that said, sometimes your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness. See, that whole thing I said about creative expression, people use that creative expression to change the way we think. People use that creative expression to change the way our children see themselves. I hate to be a nerd, but I'm a nerd. I'm really an academic. A book by Dr. Harold Cruz is called, I think it's written in 1967. It's called The Crisis of the Black Intellectual. What it talks about is that the intellectual then was not the pastor. I'm sorry.
No. That's fine.
The person that the people listen to the most is the person that plays the music. It's Aretha Franklin. It's B.B. King. They have more. And so what you must do is that you must, excuse my language, you must bastardize the music, the culture.
Yeah.
Because that way what you will do is that you will be able to keep this historical trauma manifesting itself year after. Pretty soon this just happens, you see. And so if we know that, though, like you said, we have all these resources. I'm going to always go to this because I'm getting older. I don't know how much time I have left. As I get older and as a believer, what I realize is that I think I'm supposed to live all the rest of my days doing what God told me to do.
Yeah.
That's me now. That's just me personally. And so what I was told was that once you went to OU and once you went to Syracuse and once you got all this education and when you get this license, how can you help your society? How can you help your community? How can you help your town? How can you help your family? Because what was the point of me going and getting all this education and learning all these things if you're not going to use it to help people?
That's right. And that's a total that's a different way of operating than the prevailing system, which is extremely selfish. And we have not gotten past that point yet, because across the continent of Africa, from north to south, from east to west, there was a cooperative kind of familiar system that, regardless of what they called God or what they worshiped, whether they were in the desert, whether they were in the grassland, whether they were in the rainforest, it was a different kind of family. And we'll talk some more next week and in the weeks to come about how the institution of family has been so jacked up. You can't come back and now say and criticize the Black family. First of all, some of this criticism is absolutely unwarranted. And you and I are the same age, Dr. McPherson. I grew up, there were a whole lot of daddies on the street and in our community. There were a lot of them. I mean, it wasn't this thing that people have always said. No, that was not the case. And even if it was not, even if the daddy was not there were men. Understand that your biological father was not the only man in your life.
So a cultural adaptation to a historical trauma. A cultural adaptation says that if you come from a communal society, Miss Jackson on the corner can whoop your butt, even though she ain't your mom and your daddy, because it's a communal society. But the elders will say this: when I was growing up, you could do this. When I was growing up, well, that's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
So the question becomes,
but she'd also pull you in and feed you.
Always. You could never go hungry.
She'd pull you in and feed you too.
And so then part of how we engage our community, how we engage the larger community is by teaching them how did they make the dollar circulate like that in Tulsa.
That's right.
See, that's what I'm about now. I'm not really trying to talk a lot about what happened in Tulsa, the history part. That there is a place for that. What I want to teach the children is why can't we duplicate what they were doing in Tulsa, what they were doing in Bowling?
The question that Dr. King asked: where do we go from here? That's it.
Where do we go from here? Community,
okay,
or chaos? I will say this though, as a 55-year-old elder, I'm blessed to be here. No, I don't have the luxury. We don't have the luxury of saying coulda, shoulda, woulda, I wish. My reality is that I must deal with the current situation that we face in this society. And the only way to do that is to deal with your own trauma.
Yes.
Every day I deal with issues that come out of my childhood, whether it was how I see relationships, how I see education, black-white relations comes from my history growing up in Perry, Oklahoma. I'm used to being around white people.
Yeah.
I went to school with them. I have no issue. I know them, you see. And so my comfort level, my ability to go to an OU, my ability to go to a Syracuse was made easier because of some of the very historical trauma that I got growing up in Perry, Oklahoma. Yeah. See, when I saw it at Syracuse, I knew it because I had seen it in my high school. I had seen it in my teachers. When I saw the racist teacher at OU, I remembered that person from home. You know, when you go to the bank, and the person that's got to approve your mortgage loan is somebody that you know is a racist. Yeah. Think about the trauma of that now. Yeah. The banker who has the ability to approve your loan is someone that you knew to be a racist in high school. Yeah. So that's traumatizing because all you really wanted was the ability to give your family a home. And so there's another level of anxiety because now I can't get what other people can get. And so this whole idea of no, it didn't happen. What they say, anybody got time for that? No. You know, I won't even waste my time talking to people about that didn't happen. Then see, here's the thing: only a fool argues with the wall. I mean, why would I? I mean, if you want to sit down and have a discussion, you want to have an intelligent discussion about what happened historically and how that is being manifested in our community today, then we can do that. If you don't want to have that discussion, we still have to have it, right?
Let's tell the truth, and if we can, from our standpoint, we're going to tell the truth, and you know, and we're going to do our best to correct any untruths, any lies, and if the people don't want to deal in that kind of way with us, then you know we do have the ability to shake the dust off our feet,
well,
and move on.
Let's be intellectual about it. I dare you. I double dare you. I triple dare you. Let's talk about scholarship. Let's study the actual. Either Senate Bill number 1 was a Jim Crow law or it wasn't. Now here's the thing: why are you bringing it up, Dr. McPherson? Listen, I'm not bringing it up because I don't like you. I'm not bringing it up because I don't love you. Because my religion, my spiritual belief, does not allow me not to love you. I'm bringing it up because it happened.
And what we're trying to say by that, and what I would try to say by that when I teach that, is that that's systemic. That's a system thing. That's not based on a personality. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear anybody say, from the governor, the mayor, anybody else, well, we just need to have dinner together. And look, if we're sitting across the table from a racist and somehow they miraculously say, you know what, I see the error of my ways now, and they change, that's a great thing. But that happens for that person.
Let me tell you how, for me, I have addressed historical trauma based on what you just said. I'm sitting across from the racist or whomever, anybody, because I grew up in Perry. Anybody I'm sitting across from, and they say, let's have dinner. I say, okay, this is what I want. I'm going to have dinner with you. but I'm gonna need you to give me some money or give us some programs or to create an education. See, and see that's part of my issue. My trauma has allowed me to believe that I'm equal to any man. So I have dinner with you, and I know you. I mean, I know people don't like me. What did Marcus Garvey? Who did Marcus Garvey meet with? The real leaders of who he felt like were the real leaders of the United States.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's a little different with me. My history allows me to be able to, I believe, to successfully engage white people, to successfully engage Hispanic
Which we
people.
have to.
Well, no, we don't. We don't have to successfully do it.
But we got to do it.
Well, and so not only do we have to do it, and please, I absolutely don't want this to happen, but if, I don't want to say it, but if the governor or somebody said to me, Dr. McPherson, I want to talk to you about what's going on, that's what I would say. Hey, man, let's talk. Because you know why? I'm not a politician. I'm not in that. Now, if you want to talk education, I'm in that. You want to talk therapy for people of color? I have that conversation with any professor from OU, OSU. But now, if you want to talk politics, now you got to talk to somebody else about that. Because I know, having studied it, what that's about. That's not about right and wrong.
No.
Politics is not about right and wrong. You see?
Winning.
And it's unfortunately for some people, at all costs.
At all costs.
Now, but here's how I engage politicians. What I learned at OU is what you say to a politician is, where's our middle ground? Where can we meet in the middle? There's 10 items on the table. We disagree on 9 of them. Can we put those 9 aside and can we agree on this one? I've never, ever, ever not been able to find somewhere where I can agree with any person of any culture unless they wasn't really trying to do that. Yeah. Which is often the case, so we call them on the list. So for instance, out of Tulsa, what education program came out? What education programs came out of all of the money that was raised for the Tulsa Centennial? You ain't supposed to ask that, Dr. McPherson. Well, I am if I'm supposed to help the self-esteem, if I'm supposed to help the children's trauma, if we're supposed to. And so what I say is, you know what, Dr. McPherson, you stick to how can we help people go to therapy? How can we help people get their medication if they're off their medication? How can we help people understand there are strategies so they don't kill themselves? Yeah. How do we stop people from getting addicted to opiates? Yeah. You see, how do we teach people that while marijuana is a legal drug, you can over-medicate? Yes, you can. See, that's what I'm focusing my time and energy on now. And here's what I believe, that there are people, political, who are working on the politics. I know some of them. There are people that are working on economic solutions. Our piece is therapy and clinical. How do you address historical trauma? In fact, one of the things I wanted to do just to kind of make sure I got it in is on page 12 of the study guide. Mm-hmm. She talks about, because I'm a nerd again. In school, I always learned that you're supposed to know what you're looking for before you start reading the chapter. Yeah. That's how I made A's, because I knew what I was looking for before I started reading. Mm-hmm. And so she says the purpose of this study guide, it couldn't be any clearer. She says the purpose of this study guide is threefold. So 3 things that you're trying to get out of this study guide. One is to understand the functional and dysfunctional attitudes and behaviors that have been transmitted to us that we are transmitting to others. I got that underlined. Hey, and for me as a parent, man, I got a whole lot I'm working on, because I was taught a certain way, and I realized that that's not all good now when you have children. And so I have that going on. The next one, to encourage and broaden the discussion about the implications of the issues raised in the book. Now, if you don't read the book, you won't know what we're talking about. If you don't put some effort into this, let me give you an example. What saved me at OU was that I grew up Mount Olive AME Church in Little Perry, Oklahoma. And one of the things my elders taught me is that you better read your Bible. That's your protection. So when I got to OU, I realized that for me to make it in that, with all that stuff we had going on, and for me not to lose it, I had to read my Bible every day. I had to set a certain time of day to read my Bible, because that kept me grounded in the midst of all that fun we was having at OU, and it was fun. It was. I mean, that's the best times of my life, university folks. But I had to stay anchored, or I had to stay grounded. And so what I'm saying is that for those of you all who really, really want to understand this, you got to read the book. Set a time aside for 30 minutes a day, 45 minutes a day. Some have been ordered. So the bookstore just behind this bookstore, there's a cultural center. He's going to have some in on Thursday. He's going to have some workbooks in. He's going to have some of these. You can actually go to Dr. Degruy's website also and get the book. And so here's the thing. I'm being an OU professor again, and I'm being a professor again. If you don't read the book, you can't learn. You can't understand the class. I was going to say you can't pass the class, but if you don't read the book, you can't understand. And so you haven't made the commitment to change your thinking. It takes a commit. You have to prioritize. One more. Graduate school, 1977. There was a book written called by a man named Richard Nelson. It's called The Moon and the Ghetto. I was in the library and it caught my attention. I said, The Moon and the Ghetto? So I started looking at this book. It's a public policy book, and I'm at Syracuse University in public policy. And what it talks about is that how come we were able to send a man to the moon, the technology that it takes to literally put a man on the moon, but you can't solve the problem of the ghetto. You can literally put a man on the moon, man. You ever look at the moon and you think it was a man up there, but you can't stop poverty. You can't deal with, so it talks about in this book, public policy priorities.
Yeah.
But think about that, the moon and the ghetto, you can literally create a way to put a spaceship on the moon, and now you got lots of people doing it just for tourism.
That's right.
But you can't fix the education system in Northeast Oklahoma City. How is that possible that we can be so great in what we want to be great?
Yeah.
And so that's part of that trauma when someone like me says, well, wait a minute, why are we not doing more to help people?
I happen to think a lot of it is this absolute desire. Good folks, we're not trying to hold everybody really beyond what we're trying to do now, about an hour, 15 minutes or so. But I said that I would give you an email address early. For those of you that are here tonight, that are watching, that are listening, if you would like to send a question in, or if you would like to be in the Zoom audience next week, I need you to send a request and your email address to our church's email, which is ESSCC1919. That's East 6th Street Christian Church, 1919, the year we were founded, at coxinet.net. ESSCC1919 at coxinet.net. I'll try to get that on Facebook, on our church's Facebook as well, in case you don't get it.
What was it again?
ESSCC1919 at coxinet.net. Send that in. If you got a question, please put that question in there, and hopefully we can get to address it in the coming weeks. And if you just want to be a part of the Zoom, please send it in there so we can get your email and include you on the Zoom as well. We'll be back next week at 7 o'clock. We want to thank everyone here. Thanks Sister Camille and Nappy Roots and Brother Jonathan for making this space available. Thanks Sister Carmen and Sister Dawson for handling all of our recording equipment this evening and broadcasting, and Dr. McPherson. God bless you, brother. Thank you so much, and all of you that were watching and listening this evening. We pray that y'all join us again as we get into this book next week. We'll be specific about a great many issues that Dr. Degruy wrote about on next week, and we just kind of work our way through this book the next 3 weeks. And we will get there. We're so glad to be doing this. So glad that you all are joining us. We're looking forward to this discussion. I've been excited about it since June. I think I've been planning it. And so now here we are. And we're going to do well. I want to remind you again about the 28th and the march and the rally on the north side of the Capitol. That's the side not facing downtown. The side facing 23rd and 36th Street will be there for the 58th anniversary of the March on Washington. That's why the 28th is such a big day. It's the 58th anniversary of the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. And we'll be dealing with different rights that day. And I look forward to participating with so many people and organizations on that day. Thank you again. God bless each and every one of you, and we will see you next week. Brother, thank you.